Okay, I recorded the entire video, but I just wanted to clarify. Just before we get into the puzzle ratings are around 2,638, which is my current Lichess puzzle rating. I turn off the rating when I'm doing themed puzzles, and I only play rated puzzles when I'm doing the general pool. Yeah, just to clarify. All right, hello. So normally I do not record on any other day apart from Wednesdays. Like the plan is mainly to record only on Wednesdays, or rather post the video on tactics training on Wednesday. But since this week I have slightly more time, I can afford to do more training. So today it will be on mate in three puzzles. So I've been doing a lot of mate in twos, and I thought it was getting quite easy. I mean, I'm not good, but it's just that maybe I got a little bored of it, or I was just finding the pattern slightly faster, and I thought, why not ramp it up to mate in three puzzles? Yep. So I'll be running through about 20 to 26 puzzles. Just I'm just planning to finish like one line. You know when you do Lichess puzzles, like you get like green squares. You'll see in a moment. But I just want to finish one line of green squares, and I'll call it a day. Yep. Okay, so let's get into the puzzles, the interesting stuff. Okay, so we see that the king has. All right, so now I'm on Lichess, but I'll still follow my very standard practice of using, let's see, blue circles and blue lines, arrows to indicate our own move. Then red will indicate uh like the opponent's moves. Yeah, yeah, that should be it. Anyway, um, we see that our pieces are actually controlling these squares here. So the king, if he's in a check that cannot be gotten rid of, it's basically mate. So we have to find that, and as with all positions, okay, we want to briefly scan through our checks, captures, and threats. But since this is a puzzle, okay, we need to be a little bit more intentional. Like in the game, we still do it, but here is where we are trying to practice our calculation. So we really analyze and deeply look at all the variations and all the checks, captures, and threats to train our calculation and visualization and pattern recognition. Okay, so the first one I see is this. There's this, or in fact, this is the only check that I can see. Yep. Then there are other captures here. Yeah, and that's about it. There's only one check and one capture. So yeah, so let's consider this first, okay? When we capture on e6, we see that white will take back, and that is forced, okay? And when another tip that I read about or heard is that when you are looking for winning lines, forcing moves are usually the first ones you want to calculate and consider, because those are the easiest, and it is easiest to calculate because there isn't anything that the opponent can do. You see, this is force. For example, look at this. Like there's nothing the opponent can do apart from bishop e7 and d takes e6, or this move. And because there are so little lines for the opponent to so little moves for the opponent to make, it is much easier to calculate. So forcing variations are usually the ones that we calculate first. Okay, so enough about me yapping on about how to do tactics properly. Here we see after queen takes e6, there are three moves that the opponent can make. Now let's consider each one first. So after queen takes e6 and knight e7, here in the resulting position, the knight is here, the queen is here, and we see that we can just capture the pawn on d7 and that will be mate. So that line is settled. We only have two lines left to consider. Queen takes e6. Now bishop e7. So in this case, when the bishop is on e7 and our queen is on e6, we see that the king the king now only has one square to go to if we check him here. So again, as you can see, I'm considering the checks, captures, and threats. There's also another check here, but this check here seems a lot more appealing to me because it forces his bishop here. And then after that, I can give a final check over here, and we see that his king isn't able to go anywhere else anymore because it's controlled by our bishop. And finally, the last variation we've considered is d takes e6. So queen takes e6, d takes e6, then bishop here. Okay, when this remember when this pawn moves, when this pawn moves, it clears up this diagonal that our bishop can now have access to. So capturing this, queen takes e6, then pawn takes e6, bishop b5, and then of course the white only has one move again. It's forced, only move. Then after that we'll just recapture that and it'll be mate. Okay, so okay, next one. Okay, so for this next puzzle, we see a few checks. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So okay, sorry, 5, 6, 7, 7 checks. But of course, we can rule out some which don't really seem to make any sense first. Okay, we want to calculate the ones that seem more realistic first. Okay, so there'll be this check here, 1, 2. Okay, like anything else is kind of weird. Maybe even this would be the next most, because at least you have a discovery or something. But yeah, let's just look at this first, which is already, it looks very promising. Okay, because the king only is forced to 3 squares when you make this check here. So let's consider the first one. Okay, so check, king a6, and yeah, so we see a mate here, queen to c, yeah, queen to c6, then rook b6, then queen takes b6, and that's mate. So we know that if he goes to a6, it is a forced mate. Okay, that's, yeah, again, it's a forcing line. He can't do anything about it. So check. And now let's consider what will happen if he goes to a8. Yes, I'm not really good with these coordinates, so I'm not so fast. Anyway, check a8. Then what? Okay, yeah, we just have mate over here. Queen a7 is mate. So the last one to consider is what happens if he goes to b8, right? So queen d7, king b8. Then we have bishop d6 check. And you see, because our queen is covering these squares, right? And now our bishop is covering this square, he's forced into this corner. So if you can see that with me, my queen's here, bishop's here, and his king is here. And now we have rook to c8 check. He's forced only move to play this because our queen's covering this rank. Okay, so he's forced to play rook b8. And then remember, because our bishop over here is protecting the b8 square. So yeah, we'll just play rook takes b8 after that, and that'll be mate. So we see that queen d7 is actually forced mate. Alright, maybe I've done too many of these puzzles, but I saw this one quite quickly. Yeah, so queen captures is the first check, and in fact the only check that we have. So it's if you look for checks, captures, and threats, you would have seen this instantly. So after this capture, the king only has white only has one move, and that's the recapture on b7. So now what has changed about the position is that the knight is pinned, and is an absolute pin. In other words, that gives us access to rook b4, which is the next check available to us apart from bishop takes on c6. So we consider the rook check first, since it seems to be more promising, right? Okay, and promising it is. Okay, after rook b4, the king that is on this square only has one move to make. That is to get to a8, because we see, okay, when our rook is on b4, the king is here on b7. Okay, this diagonal is open up for our dark square bishop, and the rook is covering this file, and this knight isn't able to capture the rook. So yeah, the king is forced to this square. After which bishop takes on c6 will win the game. So let's go. Alright, so this next puzzle is slightly more complicated, and it's a combination of recognizing different mating patterns. Okay, so in this puzzle, again, let's look for the checks, right? Check, 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 check. So there's like six checks here. Did I miss any? Yeah, so yeah, we have 6 checks. And okay, let's consider those first. Okay, this here, oh my gosh, capture, and there's maybe a check here, but the king has too many squares to go to, and we are down too much material, so the king escapes as well. So this line doesn't seem that great. After rook takes on e4, rook takes e4, bishop takes e4, then here's where things get interesting. We see that there is a bishop here, and so if we can force the king to get here somehow, okay, imagine the king is here. If our queen is here, this is called I can't remember what the name of the mating net is called, but I'll put our picture for it for the beginners to see. Okay, it's a type of mating net, and the king's basically trapped here, and he's mated. So, uh, capture. One way we can get a king here is through this check. Yeah, because remember we recognize the pattern first that if his king is here, it's a mate. Then we think, how can we get a king there? And we'll then see this check here, which forces the king into 3 spots, right? Okay, so picture this with me. Oh no! Oh, what did I do? Oh, okay, I can. So white's bishop's here, our queen is here, and the king is here, right? So he can either move here. Oh my goodness! Either here, or here, right? These are his only 3 moves, and again, these are all forced. So we've already covered what would happen if he goes to e5. If he goes to e5, then queen f6 mate, right? Okay. Now, so this is settled. What about if he goes to d3? Or if he goes to d3, then we have another classic mating pattern where we just bring our queen over to d2, and we see that the king has no squares to go to. Okay, the king is here, and yeah, he isn't able to go to these 2 squares because his pieces are there. Now, if you're thinking, hey, can't the knight capture the queen? No, this is now a bishop. Yes, keep track of the piece, how the pieces change. Okay, so again, bishop's here, our queen is here, his king is here. So we've covered king e5 and king d3. What about king to c3 here? Well, if king to c3, then we have finally another mating net. I think it's called the dovetail mating. The dovetail mate. Oh no! This is the dovetail mate. Oh, sorry, I got the names confused. Yeah, but we have a final mating net over here where the king is here. King is here, queen is here, and he's not able to move. Yeah, so we have found a forced mating sequence. Okay, that's very important to consider. Forced mating sequence. Now, there's one last thing that we didn't consider. What if the king simply moves away instead of recapturing the rook? Well, he only has 2 squares to move to. So again, I calculate the most um, obvious line, which is that the bishop won't recapture, right? It's only if you can't recapture the piece that, because maybe you're white and you calculated these forced mating variations. So you're like, okay, you know what? I would have to escape and prioritize that because if I recapture, I'll get mated. And the point of the game is to not get mated, right? So let's consider this move first. Okay, so our rook is here and the king is here right now. So again, our queen can go to d2, and we see that here on d2, this entire file is covered. This is covered. This is covered, and this last square for the king to escape to is covered by the rook that captured on e4. So that's a mate. So now the only last thing to consider is rook. Rook captures on e4, then king to c5. So what then? Well, then we see the same mating pattern that we saw over here, but it's just shifted over here. The dovetail mating net, where we check here, and we see that this square is covered by the rook that is now on e4. Okay, so it's covering here, and this rook is covering this file. And this queen's checking here. So that's a mate. Yep. So let's see what he plays. Okay, then mate. Okay, that was for that puzzle. Okay, yeah, just to clarify, you don't need to know the names of the mating patterns. That's really so trivial and no one cares about it. And see, I know a few names, but I still suck at the game. So yeah, you really don't need to know it. It's not necessary. What you need to know, or what is necessary, is that those patterns are etched into your mind. You're familiar with it. Anyway, let's take a look at this next puzzle. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4 checks. Right? Let's consider those first. Yeah. So queen takes on g7 isn't as so appealing to me because you're getting rid of one of your strongest attacking pieces, the queen. And but more importantly, okay, giving up your strongest attacking piece isn't the issue, but it's more of how there's no good follow up. After capturing here, king recaptures on g7, and like the attack has died. Yeah, you get a pin. Like there's a check here, but he can just recapture the bishop. And at this point, I'm not even going to bother continuing calculating. I'm just going to move on to the next line and look for something more meaningful. So I see that there's this check here as well, and if he recaptures the pawn, then I can capture the queen. Yeah, because now the rook is guarding the g7 square, and that allows me to capture on g7 with the queen, and the queen is still protected. But then, of course, like with knight to e6, there's also bishop takes e6 and rook takes e6, which after just considering rook takes e6, I don't see any good follow-up as well, and so I won't even look at bishop takes e6 already. Yeah, because maybe we can try a few more things. Maybe check here, or check here, or check here. Yeah, all of which, there's like a good counter to it. For example, let's just take rook. Oh my gosh, rook e8 check, for example. Then that opponent can just drop their rook to e8, and yeah, our attack has died. Our queen is still being attacked. Oops, queen is still being attacked. Rook is being attacked. Yeah, so we can continue calculating, but for now, because we have like four checks to cover, we just want to run through it first to see which one's most promising, right? So this is the next check here. So you see that in this check, it's the most forcing one. Why do I say it's the most forcing? Two moves, and okay, well then I guess in this case this will also be the most forcing. But the point is that we see it looks quite promising. Okay, black isn't able to move anywhere. This is covered by the rook and the knight. This is covered by the knight. This is covered by the bishop. So black really only has two options, and we already know how this pawn moving out of the way will lead to mate. So we only need, okay, just to clarify again, right? If we play why the pawn moving out of the way is a mate, in case you do not remember, knight g6, and then f takes g6, then queen takes g7. This is mate. Yeah, because the rook is protecting the queen. Okay, so he would now we know that he would recapture with the queen because that's his only other option. But you see, when he recaptures the queen, right, the a1 h8 diagonal opens up for us, and so we're able to play queen h8. Okay, like if this was an actual game, it's important. Sorry, my nose is a little blocked. Okay, there. Okay, if this was an actual game, we played here, and he captures the queen. Don't get too caught up with recapturing. Again, also know that your own queen is hanging. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Knight g6, queen takes g6, queen h8, check, and again the next move is forced. Black is only allowed to play queen to g8, where we can recapture and it'll be mate. So yeah, that will be our variation. All right, next puzzle. Okay, so here, right, you have to go in for the kill, and what I mean by that is like you have to continuously give checks because again, think about opponent's threats. If it were his move, what would he do? Okay, if he wanted to go for a draw or queen trade, he could. Okay, we see check here, and if you bring a king in, you think you're safe. Boom. Okay, oops. Oh, that's not the arrow I wanted to draw. Here. Oh no, I did it again. Here, yes. Forking both your king and your queen, so you are forced to recapture. And with that queen trade, you are in a pretty sus endgame. Might lose. You're down a pawn. Same color bishop, maybe it's a draw. Okay, anyway. And if after the check here, you decide to bring your king here. Okay, you remember you only have two squares to move to if you get checked here on e2. Then he has another check here. And in fact, now you are losing your bishop with check. Actually, you don't lose it because this has been guarded. But the point is that you start losing material, and the opponent is able to simplify the game, and you want to avoid that, right? As much as possible. So again, we look at our checks, captures, and threats. But first, we run through the checks. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 checks. Again, we'll rule out the ones that really don't seem to make any sense. For example, this check here. And this check, after 1 or 2 moves of calculating, you realize that you are just in really, really deep trouble. So, I mean, we can consider it just to show you. Queen takes g6, then h takes g6, and then what, right? What continuation you have? Like, you can't even give him a check because it's on a different colored square from a bishop. So we would consider only this move. Okay, this move also doesn't make any sense because even after he recaptures, like we give him a check and that's about it. Here, however, we see that there's a line that's quite promising and how it's also forcing. Okay, so after queen d8, then king is forced to g7. Now here, we see that our queen is guarding this diagonal. So we can actually sacrifice our bishop to force the king even further into this area because he will have no squares to move to. So after bishop, also we aren't able to use this square for check because the queen is guarding that square. So this is the next natural move that we'll look at. Okay, so queen d8, king g7, then bishop h6. Now the king is forced to recapture, okay, because he really has no other squares to go to. So now the king is here, our queen is here, and there's mate in one if you can see it. Yeah, it's just queen f8 checkmate because the queen is covering this square, the king is covering this square, and our pawn and our king is covering this square. Yep. So that is our line. And next puzzle. Okay, so for this next puzzle, let's take a look at the checks first. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, that's about it. Okay, so let's consider that this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because of this recapture. So then we'll look at this next. So the king is forced to recapture on h7 because this square is covered by the queen. So at this point, I know it's okay. Imagine the king is on h7 with me, and our rook's gone. Yeah. At this point, it's very easy to see that if there's a rook on h file, it'll be mate. So yeah, we may get too caught up with the idea of getting the queen under the h file and checking, but then these squares will no longer be controlled by the queen, and so it will not be a mate. So after capturing on h7, king takes h7, queen h3 is probably a blunder because the king escapes onto this square. So what then, right? Let's look for other checks. When the king is on h7, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 checks that we can look at. Oh, sorry, 6, but we just looked at that. So the most natural or realistic, not weird check that we have is queen g6, and that's something that looks really promising because that forces the king back onto either one of these two squares, and we know that after this force move, if the king is here, we can just play queen takes g7. That's mate. So we will let's recalculate the line now. Okay, and just confirm that's correct. All right. Okay, next puzzle. All right, this next puzzle actually has a really similar theme. So it's a rook sacrifice again, and it forces the king out. Okay, so if we capture here, okay, so before we consider the king not recapturing back, I think I was gonna say I think I didn't do that for the previous puzzle, but for the previous puzzle, it was forced. Over here, it's not forced. The king can actually move here, but let's consider that afterwards. So if we take on g7, then the king takes back on g7. Now we have queen takes on h6, which is the next. Is a natural looking check because over here we have 1, 2, 3. Just these 3, and of course 4 checks. But this check here looks really natural because first of all we're bringing our strongest attacking piece into the attack, and yeah, it also looks like it's going to lead to mate. But let's just not leave it looks like. Let's go and confirm it. So rook takes on g7, king takes on g7. Now queen takes on h6 mate. It is not one mate check, and the king is forced to this only square, this one square on g8. Now we have to be careful, right? We can't just mate. We can't just give this check on h7 because the queen covers it. So we have to mate on h8. Yeah. So now, remember we're not down to the line yet. We have to consider what if the king just goes to h8 immediately. Well, then we see that we have queen takes on h6. The queen will block on h7. And then in this position where the king is here, the enemy queen is here, our rook is here, and our queen is here, I believe you will be able to see the move. Queen takes on h7 mate. Okay, so let's play that out. Okay, so when we're taking a look at this next puzzle, what we see is that giving this check here, okay, considering the checks first, right? We only have these 3 and a 4th one here, but this one looks nicest because the king actually has very little squares to move to, and we notice that this is the only square. So I'm sure all of you are now asking the question, how about let's just push the pawn to get rid of this square, right? So that's a great idea. And every time you have these ideas, you must calculate to see if it works, right? So if we push this, then what's he going to do? What's he going to do about it? Because now we're creating this mate threat, right? So he can't bring his rooks into the game. His pieces aren't going to be able to help him. So what he can do is this move, g3. Okay, and if we take on g3, that's just ruining our plan because the whole reason for this pawn push is to get rid of this square now, right? So now after he plays g3, now he has this extra square to move to, and we want to get rid of it. So what we do is this other pawn push f3. Okay, so now we control these 2 squares. And in the resultant position, okay, our pawns are here. He has 1 pawn here. We see how we are controlling these squares. And this pawn's controlling this square. Our rooks are controlling all these squares. And we really just have to give the check for the final blow to mate him. Yeah, he's not able to bring any of his pieces in. So let's do that. Okay, next one. Alright, this next puzzle is quite nice. We see that we have 2 checks. And if we check with the bishop, we see that the king will just slide back to g8. So as bad as it looks, we should consider it because it's a check. So after queen g7, let's just take a look at it. Okay, we have knight takes g7, and then now again we have either bishop takes g7 or pawn takes g7. Okay, so if we take with the pawn with the bishop, we see that the king will just slide over to g8, and yeah, we don't really seem to get anything out of that. We can capture the rook again, but the king can just capture back on f8. So what about if we? How about we consider capturing the pawn? Yeah, and giving check, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the position again. Sorry, I paused for a moment because I thought when the pawn is here, then the king's here, then like I was thinking, why can't he move his rook? But no, let's just recalc. So every time you get lost, just calculate the variation again in your mind. So queen g7 check, knight takes g7, pawn takes g7. So now we see that the king is here. So the pawn is here, and then king forced to move to g8, and we'll recapture the rook and promote to a rook if you want to add salt to the wound. But yeah, queen or rook would be a mate. Okay, so let's promote to a rook. Nice. Okay, so for this next puzzle, yeah, let's consider checks first. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 3 checks. When you consider this check, you should already see and notice that, hey, okay, let's take note that we have this pin on this pawn. So this pawn is actually only defended once, and that's by the knight. So that makes this check look very promising, and this check looks quite ridiculous at the moment. So rook takes h5 check. Knight recaptures on h5. Okay, that's forced. Again, the king has no squares to move to. This is covered by the rook, and when the rook is here, this is being covered by the rook as well. So rook takes h5, knight takes h5. Now let's play rook takes h5 again. And we see that, oh, the king can escape to this square, and yeah, so he sort of gets away, and we can't bring our queen in. So then, how about let's consider queen takes h5, right? So let's run through the line again. Rook takes h5, knight takes h5, now queen takes h5. So now the queen is on this square, the knight's gone, the rook's gone. Okay, so the king has 2 squares to move to, and whichever square he moves to, we see that queen h7 is mate. Okay, so let's go through the line once more in our heads just to verify that it's working. And we look around like, well, you know, is there like some quiet move that he can do after here? Is there anything that he can do? Nope, he can't recapture the pawn. Just make sure we're not trolling. Okay, let's go. Okay, so for this next puzzle, yeah, we can see that there is quite a few checks. So let's just go with the, yeah, I mean, oops, there's also a check here, here, here. Yeah, but let's go with the most realistic ones. Okay, you know, this check looks really good if this file is being covered by the rook. But we see that if we try to make some rook move, then he has, you know, he's crap like rook capture, queen captures on c3, and then he just picks this up. Yeah, and with check, by the way, because, you know, when he captures this, we are forced to move here. He'll recapture this with check, and we're forced to move here. Yeah, and he can start going in for some attack. So yeah, rook e1 is horrible. So so we'll consider this check as well. It forces the king here. Then maybe rook here would work, but then we see that he gets to escape. Yeah, so now we want to consider this check, but we know that giving a check with the queen on g7 will allow the king to move out the board or escape. So something that will force the king back is rook g7, and that is the one that I would consider. And so after rook g7 and the king goes to e8, we see that, you know, it's a very similar mate to what we saw earlier. And if we're just sitting, if our queen is just along this file, in fact, I was going to say on this square, but I realized it's anywhere along this file, then it's a mate. You see, because the rook is covering this this rank, and we're checking the king, and he's got nowhere to go. The only issue is that the queen is covering 3 squares on this file. Okay, so we have to be careful of that. So rook g7, king e8, and so now we can't just bring our queen over to e6 for a check, because it'll get gobbled out by the queen, it'll be captured. So what we can, our other alternative to get onto the file, the only square available is here on e3. And on e3, we see that the queen is not able to capture our queen, and no matter where it goes to block the check, it is undefended. So yeah, let's just again verify that this line, it works, and we are not going to be blundering a queen away or a rook away. Just checking. Okay. Yes, yeah. Oh my, I almost blundered. Okay, so this next puzzle is slightly easier because um, it just so happened that the first check that I considered happened to be the right one. Because I noticed that actually the king has no squares to move to. This is covered by the rook. It's covered by the rook, and these are covered by the pawns. So yeah, this check looks really appealing. Of course, I did consider this check, but I realized, say, if you push this pawn, this square now becomes empty, and the king can just move over to it. So bishop h6 came to mind. Oh, this h6 square has really been like quite quite a common theme over all these puzzles. But anyway, bishop h6. I was like, wait, isn't that mate? But yeah, then I realized the opponent can push g5, but we'll capture with our bishop. Again, you do not want to capture the pawn because I mean you could. I was thinking, I want to maintain control of these pawns. But you see, when you capture the pawn, then the king would slide over here, and you have nothing left to attack this square. Whereas if you recapture the bishop, okay, let me run through the variation again so that we're not lost. Actually, not we, so that it's more like so that I won't get lost. But anyway, bishop h6, g5. Bishop captures on g5. See, our bishop's here, right? If he slides now when we recapture the bishop, when he slides his king over to g4, right? We can play h5, and yeah, we see that that's a mate because these squares are covered by our bishop. Let me use another color. These squares, let me just use the same color. These squares are covered by the bishop. These are covered by the rooks. Then these are covered by the pawns. And our pawn here, okay, is covering this square. So we see that that's a mate. Yeah, so I actually didn't consider anything else. Yeah, I just saw this, and because it's entirely forcing, okay, I'm just going to go with it. Okay, next puzzle. Okay, so for this next puzzle, we have two checks here, and I would, of course, let's consider the more obvious ones from now on. Yeah, rook g8 seems like you're just trolling because then you don't really have anything afterwards. I mean, yeah, which is something that I guess you should still calculate because you never know if there's something. But yeah, just two moves in, and we see that it's not that great. So let's just consider the one that's more realistic first. Okay, so rook h7, then we see king g8. Okay, so yes, this can capture. I missed that, but I saw that if he moves his king to g8 and he chooses not to capture, then we have a mate over here. Okay, we have a knight e7 mate. So now what if he chooses to capture, right? Because he wants to avoid getting mated. So he is sort of forced to recapture the rook, or to capture the rook. So after he captures the rook on h7, we have two options for checks. Or rather, we only have one option for check, and that is g7 check. I initially considered recapturing the knight, but I realized that the king is actually stuck here if we give a check. So when we give a check, the king is forced over to g8, and then we have two checks in that position. Okay, so I'll run through the variation and tell you where all the pieces are. Then we try to visualize this with me. Okay, so rook h7, knight captures h7, pawn g7, and finally king g8. So the king is here, the knight is here, and our pawn is here. Okay, there's no more rook. This rook is no longer here, and the pawn is no longer here as well. Okay, yeah. So in this position, we have two checks. Can I check the king? Okay, the king here, or we can check the king like this. Now, when we check the king, oh my goodness, when we check the king this way, we see that the king gets to escape out here. So let's consider the other check. You see, when we check here, these two squares are being covered by the knight. These two squares are being covered by the pawn, and this square is occupied by the opponent knight, and so we see that's actually a mate. Yeah, so let's finalize the line in our minds and recalculate it just to make sure we're not going to blunder anything here. Okay, rook h7, knight takes h7, g7, king g8, and finally knight h6 mate. Okay. Okay, for this next puzzle, we see that the king is also quite in a pickle. He only has one square to move to. This knight is being defended by this pawn. So this check is very, very, very obvious. Or not obvious, but it's glaring. It's screaming out like it's the only check in the position. That makes sense. This is the only other check in the position, and it doesn't really make too much sense. So we'll consider this first. Then the king slides over to black. Okay, yeah. So this is g4. So we see that all these squares, right, are now covered, and the king is here, and the knight is not required in maintaining this barrier. In other words, the knight can jump out and give a check, and this barrier still exists. Yeah, so the knight is only able to jump out to this square to give a check. The only other available checks are here. But we see that once after this check, and the king drops back to the h file, right? In fact, if he drops back to h4, we aren't able to give any more meaningful checks. Moreover, if we move our knight, the rook is hanging. The rook is hanging over here, right? Because we brought it over here. So the check with the knight looks really, really appealing. So let's run through that line again. Oops, e5, then king g4, then knight to f2, and finally the king has two options. He can either drop back to h4 or h5. Okay, let's take a look at that position and visualize this with me. Okay, our knight's here, our pawn is here, and the king, let's say he drops back to h4 first. Well, in this position, we see that the knight is covering this square, our king is covering this square, and the rook is covering this entire file. And if the rook comes over to h3, we see that it is a mate because the king has nowhere to go and the rook is being protected by the knight. Okay, so what if he drops back to h5? So again, our king is here, the pawn is here, and our knight is here. So when our knight is here, note that this square is being covered by the knight. Our king's covering this square, our king's covering this square, and look, it's classic back rank mate. If we bring our rook here, it is just a back rank mate. Okay, so now we've calculated our line. It makes sense. Just check, is there any move that isn't forcing? So is he forced to move into a particular spot? Okay, and no, I do not see any. And let's just do blunder checks. Is a piece actually hanging? All right. All right. So for this next puzzle, yeah, we have three very juicy looking okay, sorry, two very juicy looking checks. And we see that maybe we have some ideas of check here, check. Nope, it's covered twice. So we check here, come out, check here, maybe. But then the king just moves to some random spot, and then when he moves back to a particular spot, and you have to check him again. You know that maybe there's a potential for perpetual there, or like if your opponent wanted to, he could just go into a perpetual, and you have to find another move. So that is instantly ruled out. Yeah. So we know that this square is unavailable, and in fact, even if we came back here, right, he could block with this pawn, block with the knight, block with the queen. He wouldn't do that because of this bishop, but I'm just saying he could block it. So we have to look for something else more concrete. Okay, this might not be entirely forcing. In fact, this is bad because if we give a check here, it does this. Okay, and his king is here. Then it's actually a fork. Yeah, we're losing a piece there. We don't have this intermezzo check because the knight's guarding that square. So check. This is forced. Now we have two options of another check. 3, but hey, I'm not going to consider that. Okay. And we know that this f6 square is a bit of a pain. It's something that is guarded sufficiently by black. And we don't want to be trading off now, okay? Because we are hanging mate as well. So imagine if we played bishop here and knight recaptures. We do not even have time to recapture here because black would just mate us on b2. So yeah, we do not want to be trading pieces now. We want to continue and keep our attack going. So queen d8 and king g7. Now let's consider our next check, which is if you recognize this pattern from earlier, okay, then congratulations. Okay, you're building a pattern recognition. But this idea of sacrificing the bishop here on h6 and drawing the king out. Okay, so earlier there was a pawn on g6, but now there isn't a pawn. So we should also, and we have to consider the possibility of king g6. But let's consider, okay, what if, remember, let's say the opponent doesn't trust you and your sacrifice isn't sound. Okay, we need to make sure the sacrifice is sound. What if the opponent just recaptures on h6? Then what, right? Okay, then we see that, okay, we have two checks here. 3, but again, I'm avoiding this square because it's defended sufficiently by black and we do not want to trade pieces. Now, this is straight up mate. Yeah, and so we are not even going to consider this. Now, the next thing we have to consider, okay, imagine our queen's here, the king's here, our bishop's here. If you don't remember how we got there, check, here, check. Okay, so our queen, bishop, enemy king. If the enemy king decides to move to g6, which is his only other square because it's covered by the queen, right? Oops. So his only other square is g6. Then again, queen to g5 is mate. Yep, so we have found our line. Let's just recalculate and confirm that we are not trolling. Okay. All right, a few more puzzles to go. Let's go. All right, so for this next puzzle, black's already in a pretty bad spot, and we have like uh, quite a strong attack going on. So yeah, the first move that comes to mind is queen queen to h5, because you know you want to reroute your queen and you want to threaten this square, and that's it's like the only check that we have that sort of like continues the attack well. Yeah, okay, because again you can calculate this. You know, if you capture here, he just recaptures the queen or even the king, and you're just a queen down, and you're losing the game. So that's why I say this looks better. It looks like continues the attack well, because this doesn't seem to make any sense. Okay, so queen h6, and this is forced. Like king g8 is forced. Now over here, if we simply check on h7, the king sort of gets away, and on f8, and if we give another check on h8, the king will escape to um, e7. So we need to keep this square guarded by our queen, so that if he does run over, we can mate him. One way to do that is bishop to h7. So I'll run through the variation again, don't worry, with bishop h7. So queen h5 check, then king, okay, sorry, queen h5 check, king g8, now bishop h7 check. Now, we already know, okay, our bishop's here, our queen's here, our enemy king's here. If the king slides over, then it's mate. The question to ask is, what if the king goes back to h8? Well then, we have a very nice pretty mate. So if you are familiar with the Smolten mate, you would have instantly seen knight f7, okay, because these squares are blocked off by our bishop, and the king is stuck in this corner and has nowhere to go. One nice way to give a check is with knight f7. Okay, so let's just calculate again, make sure that our lines are all sane, and that they work. Okay. Okay, for this puzzle, we see that our queen is controlling this diagonal, our bishop is along this diagonal, it's pinning this pawn, and our rook has control of this open file. This rook is doing nothing over here. Yeah. See, I'm wondering why the opponent played this move, but okay, I really shouldn't be focused on that. I mean, even if we capture here, then what's he planning to do? Check? Then we move over. What was that supposed to be? It's a classical game that was played. Okay, sorry. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. Yeah, so we have a few checks over here. There's queen, queen g5, queen g6, queen g7, queen h8. So I know you are probably tired of me running through all the checks with you already, but I think that it's pretty important. And when looking for tactics, and it's not even when looking for tactics, it's just it should be something that comes naturally to you. In order for it to be natural, you must be intentional about practicing it many times. It's like if when you're brushing your teeth, right? You don't really think about the strokes. How are you supposed to brush your teeth? I mean, I hope you do. But when you brush your teeth, you already know sort of the strokes you're supposed to make. It's all muscle memory. It's all ingrained in you already, and that's the point of being so intentional. It's why on every puzzle I repeat. Here are the checks. It's because I'm just trying to get myself and you into the habit of looking for it. So I hope you do not get annoyed at that. Anyway, there's also this other check here, and so again these three checks very weird. So let's just look at the ones that look more normal first, right? Okay, so there's this check, king goes in, or even worse, the knight blocks here, and we don't have any solid continuation. Sacrificing the queen doesn't seem very sound, because after the pawn recaptures, there is no good continuation. So now what about bishop takes? Bishop takes looks good because again it's very forcing. Okay, the rook has to take back. Why? Because the king has no other squares to go to. Okay, these squares are occupied, and with the bishop here, this not occupied. These squares are covered by the queen. Okay, and with the bishop here, the king's in check. So the king has nowhere to move to, and the rook is the only piece that can recapture. So after the rook captures, we see that this open file that our rook's in control of can be utilized, because now this is a check. This is a new check that's introduced with the change in the position. So bishop takes f7, rook takes f7. Now rook d8 check, and now the king is unable to move anywhere. No other pieces can block this check. No other pieces can capture this rook apart from the rook. Okay, the rook can block the check. That's all he has. But in this position, we see that we have two pieces on the rook, and we can recapture the rook. Now, what piece should we capture with? Okay, yeah, it doesn't matter. Both capturing with both the rook and the queen will lead to mate. So, yeah, we see that forcing line. Let's just calculate it again, just to make sure we didn't blunder anything. Okay, let's capture the rook. All right, next puzzle. All right, so we have like 3 puzzles left, I think. Okay, for this next puzzle, for this next position, we see that we have a check here, 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 here. Okay, so that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 checks. Okay, but you know, the ones that really, really look like they are worth something, worth our time, is maybe, oops, this check. We should consider this check, this check, and this check, and this check. Anything else seems a little too weird. Even these two look weird already. Okay, so this check looks really unfavorable, like unsightly to begin with because there are so many pieces controlling it. But we still have to consider it. Okay, so see, check, recaptures. Yeah, we can't check that again because of the recaptures. Oh, I've checked recaptures. Is there anything else? Okay, so nope, there isn't. So now then if we do consider these two, we see that the king captures on either spots and there's no good continuation either. So let's take a look at this. Check here. When the king captures back on f8, that allows for rook or queen d8 check. Yeah, and we also see a queen f6 check. So let's try rook f8, king takes f8, then rook e8, rook d8 check. Now the king is able to move to only one square. Okay, the f7 square where it started from. But you see, here's the problem again. We are already in this position, and we need to check the king with something in order to get into mate. And we just lost one rook to get into the original position, so it's not doesn't seem that good. So how about queen? Okay, rook f8, king takes f8. Now let's try queen to d8. Queen to d8 check, and again we have the same issue where the king slides back up here, our queen is here. The king slides back up to f7, and we just seemingly gave out a rook for nothing. There's no good continuation. So our final option, okay, rook to f8, check, king takes f8. Now, nope, that's not our option. Queen f6 check. Now, imagine this: the enemy king is here, this rook's no longer here, and our queen is here on f6. So in this check, the black has 3 moves, either e8, g8, or queen f7. Now, in all of these positions, okay, we will take a look at our next check, bringing in our last piece as well, rook d8. And we notice, and it's really beautiful, that rook d8 can actually be pre-moved because regardless of what black decides to respond with, rook d8 is actually mate. Now, okay, if you can picture that, maybe our queen is here, enemy queen is here, enemy king is here, our rook is here, it's mate. Or if the king moved over here, this is mate. And if the king moved over here, this is still mate. So yeah, that's pretty beautiful. Okay, let's recalculate just to ensure that we are not blundering anything, that the variation all works out in our favor, that we didn't miss anything, and no careless mistakes. Okay. Oof. Now you see that is something that I missed. It's something that I missed. This is horrible. How I did not see this, even though this still works. Okay, it still works because of this pin. Yeah, that is horrible. I do not deserve to get this right. Yeah, I do not deserve to get this right. Okay. All right, let's move on. In this position, we have 2 checks over here. It's a double check. In other words, the king is forced to move. After which we can follow up with rook. Okay, so regardless of which check we give, the king is forced to either g1 or e1. So that's why I say we can follow up with a rook b1 check. But the problem with so there lies the problem. Okay, should we bring our knight to d2 or e3? And so let's consider d2 first. Okay, because d2 is the wrong move actually. If we do knight d2, king e1, then rook rook b1. What am I saying? Rook b1. Then we see the king can recapture our knight. But if our knight's over here, the king isn't able to capture our knight, and we can actually follow up with a mate. Yeah, in this, if our rook is here, okay, the king is here, and our knight is here. That is a mate. See, our bishop controls these squares, our knight's covering these squares, and our rook controls these squares, and these are pawns that are in the way of the king. Yeah, so this is the answer. I really should have checked through that one, but I was pretty confident I should have given you guys the opportunity to check through that. Okay, let's take a look at this next puzzle. Okay, so in this position, we only have one check. There's no other check available to us. And yeah, so let's consider that. Okay, check, and then what? He only has one move again because this is essentially a back rank mate. If not for this rook, so the rook will drop back to f8, and from there we see that we actually have another check here. The rook takes f8, followed by a discovered check. Okay, when we move our knight out of the way, and that looks really attractive, right? Because we think, oh, if he moves his king here, then we have a check here, and mate, or even better, like we check here. Okay, his king's here. He moves in, then he moves in, then we can give a check here, and he goes in and then mate. Well, the issue with that is that then both the queen and the knight are able to defend against this check. So yeah, it doesn't work. Even though check or let me try to start using notation more consistently. Okay, rook takes d8, rook f8, rook takes f8, then knight takes on e5, and we see that the queen has no good squares to block the check. So anywhere the queen blocks, we actually win, or win the exchange. Either win the exchange or we just win the entire piece. So yeah, black would block with knight f6. That seems like the most realistic option. Yep. So and then our attack ends and the game continues, but we see that black is up a pawn and it's unfavorable for us as well. Our king is extremely open. So rook takes on f8 might not be what we're looking for. Yep. And so we consider the final check in our position that is available to us after rook takes on d8. After rook takes d8, this file actually opens up a theme that's really similar to the puzzle we did earlier, where the queen sacrifice on I think it was yes, the queen sacrifice on e6 open up the diagonal for the bishop in the same way. Over here it's very similar. Okay, rook takes d8, then the opponent is forced to play rook f8, and then now this diagonal is opened up for our queen, so we can play rook c4 check on the king. The king is forced to move to h8 because the rook is being pinned to the king. Okay, the king was here, the queen is here, the rook is here, our rook is here. This rook is currently being pinned to the king, and so the king is only allowed to move in, and it will finally finish up the game with rook takes on f8 mate. Okay, so that is the entire puzzle. All right, that will be the final puzzle of the day. Thank you guys very much for watching, and see you guys soon.